throw a lot of things at you guys. This is a deeper level talk, so this is not going to be introductory really at all. But hopefully you've seen some stuff enough to kind of follow along. And there'll be points where you can kind of ask some questions and I'll let you know. Other than that, kind of stick with me. And like he said, it's being recorded, so you can catch some of this later. So right off the bat, we're going to dig into this project setup. To create an Angular native project, TNS create project name --ng. That'll give you a template for an Angular native project. And then I'm happy to announce that the NativeScript theme core is a project that we've been working on. I've been contributing on it. And it is a bootstrap-like theme for NativeScript. It is really, really nice. And so without further ado, TNS create project name. I actually did that right before, and that dropped me into this Angular native project. And I did go ahead and already install, and I'll just show you. This is the base project. I already installed NativeScript theme core. So this is exactly what you get with that command. TNS create project name --ng. This is an example of the app component that you get, basic level app component. Gives you the template here, has a simple setup. We get ng module, already bootstrapped, ready for this component. And if I look in package, you can see that theme core is installed here. But we're not using it quite yet. So if we run this app, this is what we see. Really simple, really basic. So it's going to start out slow here, but we're going to dive into some stuff. So really simple out of the box. I'm going to go ahead and run TNS live sync iOS emulator watch. And we're just going to quickly add some styles to that page. Just to show you a little preview of what comes with NativeScript theme core. Let's see, get going. All right, we got live sync going. So we're just going to actually strip out the styles that come out of the box. This is all this stuff here. We actually don't need any of it. When you install NativeScript theme core, it automatically adds this import line to your CSS file. There is a light and a dark theme. By default, it'll add light, so you actually get a ton of really handy bootstrap-like styles from this. We're just going to throw an h1 class. We'll throw text center. We're going to add a class on here, so we get p-20. There's tons of utilities like this throughout, and you can find that. I'll just point you real quick on the NativeScript docs. There is a theme section underneath user interface, and this details some of what is available here and kind of what it does. And then furthermore, you can go to the GitHub project. It's at nativescripts org theme, and these are kind of some of the examples that you get with some of the theme styles. And then there is a docs. I think we have it on the wiki right now. Oh no, I think we moved it. I think most of it we can do inside. Yeah, class names. Everything's right here now. And that'll kind of give you a sample. But so continuing along, I'm just going to add a class here. This will look familiar. I'm just going to add button and button primary. And let's see, on our label down here, we're just going to add text. And for clicks, let's do H3. So we get H1s to H5s out of the box here. Let's see what we get. For those watching on YouTube, this is how we do it in Portland. Cheers to everyone. So you can see that we just got a button primary class there. It just added a button style there to our tap button. Really simple. Just base level styles here. Okay, so kind of enough of that preview stuff. What we want to dig into now is routes. So right off the bat, routing inside Angular Native uses Angular routes component router, and we're going to create basically a home component that's going to house our base level route, and we're going to kind of build upon this. So just to kind of create this out, I'm going to do create components directory. Inside of components, we're going to create home.component.ts and an HTML file. and inside here to speed this up so you guys aren't watching. Live coding is great. Watching me type every single command probably gets a little boring. So this is going to help speed it up for us. So one thing to note, this TS file, this is the home component, and basically it's the guts of what is in app component now. So again, what you get out of the box with the Angular native template is this tap logic. We're basically moving the guts of this out and into our home component. And you can see that's exactly the guts that were there. And then we are going to just drop a template, which this looks just like the template in our app HTML. So if I look at that, same thing, we're just going to move it to home component. You can see it's the same. And the reason we're doing this is we're going to set up our app component, which is our root component, as the page router outlet. So we're actually going to take all this out, and we're just going to make this page router outlet. And so basically what that's going to give us is an app that's bootstrapped. Root component is set up for the Angular router, and we can now just set up Angular routes, and that's going to load in our root component. And this is one way to kind of set up routes. There's many different ways you can set this up, and I'm just kind of using a straightforward path to demonstrate here. So with that out, the next thing is our components module. So this is something I'm going to recommend if you do Angular native development. What I find is really handy is to actually create a components module. You'll see the benefits of this as we get going. So what I'm going to do here is create a new file. This is going to become components.module, and I'll talk through this real quick. So we're importing the NativeScript Angular modules here. Right at the top, we got NativeScript module, performance module, HTTP, and router. We're not going to really use HTTP in this, but we're going to go ahead and import it for good measure. It's good to have it. Most apps end up using it down the line. And then, of course, we're grabbing ng module from core and router. And then we're importing the home component that we just created. And then we're going to set up a constant. Okay, this is a convenient accessor. And you'll see the benefits of this as we get going too. This is my style, by the way. You can do this any way, but I'm just going to show you kind of a way that really, for me, makes it really nice and rapid to develop with. So we've got a components convenient array, and then our ng module, which defines our components module. We're importing all those NativeScript Angular modules, and then we're declaring our components array. Okay, and that right now just contains home component. And then we're also exporting all those same NativeScript Angular modules, including the components array. The reason we're doing this is because our components module is going to be imported into our Bootstrap module, and we won't have to import those ever again. So that's kind of the thing behind importing these modules and exporting them out. This module we take and import somewhere else, and we don't need to import those things again if they're exported out of this module. So, and the reason for the components array is because we're going to build up our routes and build more components. But the thing that you really don't want to get into is like having to keep up with two separate lists, right? So you'd have to declare each of those components individually in your declarations in the module. And then you'd also have to export those too, because yeah, you don't want to keep track of two lists. So that's really what this components convenient array is going to do. You'll see some stuff like that throughout NativeScript Angular source, as well as even Angular 2 itself. We'll do the same with providers because we're going to create a service too. By the way, we're going to get to Firebase integration. We're going to deal with observables and dealing with change detection, understanding all that. So we're going to dig into all that here. So let's see, we've got our home component. Now we need to make sure that our components module is imported into our main Bootstrap. So this is the main Bootstrap file that came out of the box. We don't need NativeScript module imported anymore because we're going to instead import our components module. And I'll use the spaces. I'll use the space here. This is a standard that's definitely become like kind of the convention. I've been kind of against it, to be honest with you. they have, like, Minko did an awesome job creating a codalizer which analyzes your code and it'll warn you and say, like, hey, you don't have spaces in your import statements. It's great, but I mean, to me, you just gotta add the extra space there. So I'm just gonna follow standard Angular 2 conventions here just for clarity. So we got our components module being imported. And then we also want to bootstrap our routes. So we have the route with the home component, and we want to import the NativeScript router module. And I'll just type it out here. Should not be this in the future. And this will be NativeScript router module. And this is much like the router module from Angular 2, but it contains all the special routing directives that come with NativeScript Angular itself. So you get all the stuff from Angular's router, but this is like providing for several different things. And actually, I don't think it's for root. It is for root. And we want our routes. Okay, so I'm going to grab the routes from our components module. So what we've done is basically taken out the other imports. We're importing in the components module. We don't need all those other imports now because those are exported from components module. So we're bringing those in, and then we're just specifying our routes here in the root module. So that's why we're using for root to define these routes. And just look back over. Okay. All right. Now let's run this real quick and let's see if we actually broke anything. And while that's running, so on these points where I run and rebuild the thing, I give you guys a minute to ask any question about what I just went over there. So if anyone has a question or is confused about something, go ahead and ask. And if everybody's straight, that's a good sign. Okay? Well, we're going to run it and see if our routes work. So they do work, actually. Now it's running, and this is actually bootstrapped with our route. So obviously we don't see anything different, because all we did is just created the same view. But we have routing enabled. So to actually expand on our routes now, we're actually going to create a new route we can navigate to. But you can see this is the same. This is the home component, though, loaded in our paid router outlet, which is now in our main app component here. So let's create something where we can actually see a little bit more what's going on. And we're going to get into a list view, and this will give us an opportunity to look at some change detection stuff, which is really interesting. So let's create such. This.component.ts and HTML. And I got the TS file. So one thing that's annoying that you guys might have noticed is that in VS Code I got all these stray JS files. I like to hide those because really they just get in the way. Sometimes you do want them. Sometimes you get a bug and it will say a line number in a JavaScript file, and so sometimes you do want to look at that to see what was going on. But for now, we're going to hide those. And they all go away. Much, much better. Okay, so this component I just dropped in here. This has just got a really simple setup. We just got an items array that we're going to bind to, and I'm just looping through 3 items, and I'm just pushing in an object with a title, and it's just item 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to bind to this in our list view here. And actually, just to show you these snippets, there are NativeScript Angular snippets that I published for VS Code, and you can just do ns to pull them up. These are the same NativeScript XML snippets that you get in just standard NativeScript development, but you can use these inside HTML files. You can also use them inside TypeScript files, because you can embed inline templates inside of components. So I'm just going to do an ns stack, and we'll do an ns list view, just to show you this outright. We're going to bind right to items. So again, in the list view template here, we've got items, and the rest that comes from the snippet we actually don't need to use. I'm just going to pull that out. And then we've got a template here that serves as our template iterator. And then inside, we're going to put a stack, and we'll put a label, and we're going to bind it to item.title. And our same Angular 2 binding syntax works great. And then make sure that is same thing that I had here. So we have a list component now, and now we want to add it to our routes. So we want to be able to navigate to this component. So I'm just going to use this line and import list. So list component, and we're going to find a new path. So we're going to be list and component, list component, and then we're going to also add it right here in this one place. And again, if we didn't have our convenient array right here, we would have had to enumerate out that in declarations and in our exports. So again, for simplicity, you can use kind of a convenient array like that. Okay, so we have our list components, and now we need a button to actually navigate to it. So if we go to home component here, we're going to add a button. It's nsbtn, and we're not going to use a tab. We're actually going to use the NativeScript Angular directive nsrouter link, and then this is going to route to the list route, and then our text here is just going to be called open list. And I'm just going to run it for the heck of it. I think we have everything. Should be everything. We'll see. And look, hopefully we do run into some errors, because those are the types of things you'll run into on your own, and you'll be like, what? And and we can try to work through that ourselves, and you can kind of see what some of those. So perfect, it worked. So really simple. We've got a list component that we're navigating to. We have a back button here. And there's actually a couple things we're missing that would be nice. At least on our home page anyway, every native app needs a little header at the top. So let's add a little action bar to the top here. It's going to be ns action. And it gives us some action items out of the box, but I'm not going to use those right now. We're just going to call this Angular native. And with that change, should drop us in a little action bar at the top. And then the thing you'll notice is now when we navigate, we actually get Angular native in the link up there. That's usually not desirable. Some apps may want that, but that's simple to get rid of. We're actually just going to add an action bar here. And we're going to take out our action items, and we're going to use a NativeScript item called navigation button, which actually there's not a snippet for, which reminds me I need to add a snippet for it. But we're just going to set this text to back. And one thing of note, in NativeScript, vanilla NativeScript, I'll call it, you don't have to close all your XML tags with the proper ending tag, but in NativeScript Angular you do. That is because it uses the parse5 DOM adapter when it parses these views, and it requires an ending tag on the end. With that in mind, let's see if we actually get back. So now when we open list, we get back. That's usually what is desired. But yeah, it just depends on the app. And actually I'm going to give this a title. We're going to call this Firebase list because in a moment we're going to integrate Firebase. We're actually going to create a brand new Firebase project and integrate it and actually wire that to the view here shortly. So before I save that, let's look at a couple interesting things with change detection. So right now we got default change detection strategy, okay? That is binding to items. If we were to push into this list, let's just add public add, and then let's say this.items.push, and this title is going to be item, and we'll use the link of the array, so that's this.items.link, which in that case would be 3, so we want to add one to make sure that we add it with the right one on the end. And let's actually add now an action item, which is not a direct snippet for that, so I'm just going to code that straight in. Action item, and inside here, we are going to have a button. I'll use this button for this. And the text here is going to be add. And our tap is going to be wired to that add method that we just added there. We need iOS position right, I think it is. Let's see if that works. Actually, it's probably an error because our template wasn't saved either, and it's going to say, no, there's no method called add. No, it worked. Good. Well, maybe that's an improvement. Usually it would reference something like that, but that's good news. So, let's see. This was not in the original plan, but I'm just kind of throwing this one in here ad hoc. There we go. So, this is it. That's actually interesting that we ran into that, right? This has been me before. You have to add the tap on the action item itself, not on the button inside the action item. Now this is just, of course, when dealing with an action bar at the top. So that's just an interesting point about Angular native development. So we have this add function, right, and it's adding these items, cool. But let's say we wanted to engage in an extra cool performance boost and use change detection strategy push. So we're going to set this to change detection strategy on push. This wasn't in the original plan either, but we're going to see how it works out. So on push, by default, if you see a tree of components, everything is default change detection. So that means every single component in the tree is going to get checked when a change occurs. This is much like Angular 1. So this is probably being inherited through because we are picking that up right here on items. But what you get is every time a change happens, a click, set timeout, or an HTTP call or subscription, it'll check all the changes in all the components. So I mean, in a web app, for instance, if you had up to 50 components all nested, you get every single one of those components being checked for a change. With on push, you're saying only when the reference changes. So if that array bound to that item, only if the reference changed would it actually cause that change detection to occur. So you end up getting a lot of nice performance benefits, especially when you have a pretty large nested component tree, because if you have a component that's far down in the tree that actually needs a change, it will not be checked and will not be part of kind of something that happens up higher up. And so in essence, you're getting a lot more fine-grained change detection. And so you end up better performance because it's not checking every single little component at all times. So what we're going to do is actually bind this to a observable here from RxJS. And one of my favorites, behavior subject. You could use a standard observable here too. Behavior subject is a little convenient because you do get the ability to bind straight to it, for instance. With an observable, you'd have a little more setup to do. So we're going to have a behavior subject here, and instead we're going to use a naming convention that is somewhat debatable right now on observables, but I tend to like it, using the suffix of a $sign for observables. And let's see, add push. And we're going to use next instead. Have you guys, can I see a show of hands on who's used RxJS observables? Good few people? Okay. So you guys are somewhat, you probably used behavior subject before. Nice. So of course, because this is Angular native, you can use all that stuff in here with NativeScript. It works just the same. And what I'm going to do here, this time we're actually going to emit those out. And we're going to emit this array here. And then add here. Instead, just push this out in. And then we're going to emit that in the results array out. Okay, so all we've done here is we're changing up to use an observable instead, and so on this component, we're going to bind to that observable and use the Angular 2 async pipe. Really powerful, really super nice, because when the view is constructed, it's going to create that subscription, and then when it's destroyed, it's going to automatically unsubscribe. So you could manually subscribe to that observable in your component or in a service, but then you'd have to manually unsubscribe from it and clean up yourself. So Angular's components automatically clean that up for you when you use the async pipe. So let's save this. I don't know why that always comes up online. Nothing. So let's see what we got. We got items, the behavior subject, we're creating it. Oh, of course. So I moved this to an init function just because that's, again, kind of my style of it, but there was nothing actually being emitted into that observable, so it was empty. So now we're just going to call init in the constructor, and now we should have items. And of course, adding to it works the same. So this was just to show you guys that we could use a direct binding to an array, or you could use an observable here. And I wanted to transition to observables because we're about to wire in Firebase, and we're definitely going to use observables to actually deal with all that data. So I just wanted to show you that that can be done. Okay. Let's also, actually, let's look at something here. I'm going to take out this change detection. And let's save this. See what effect that has. You'll often see that double trigger when you got live sync going if you save two files, one for the view change and one description. So we are still getting those. This actually could be something because we only have like one component in our routing tree here. OnPush doesn't actually seem to be giving us any visible changes because we actually are still getting that change detection. We'll see this more when we integrate Firebase, and you'll see when the sync comes in, as we're integrating with a third-party plugin, that this will have an effect. So we'll leave this for that. Okay. So I'm going to get away from lists just for a moment, and instead, let's take a break and look at a modal. We're just going to do a quick modal creation because I always love to do modals. They're always interesting, and Angular Native is no exception here. So let's create a modal component. We're going to integrate that, and then we'll come back to Firebase in a moment. So let's actually do new components here. Modal. Now we've got a modal component here. This is going to show you guys some interesting things with the module, our components module, and how you have to deal with this. So I'm going to take our modal component, drop this in, and our modal component template, drop this in here, and then I'll explain this real quick. Our modal component, this is the one that we're going to open in a modal. One thing of note, we're injecting modal dialog params. This is something from NativeScript Angular directives dialogs. This is a service that will allow you to grab contextual data from the caller. So whoever's calling show modal we can grab some data from that. So this is how you can pass data back and forth between the modal and its host or parent view. And then this is what our view file looks like for the modal. It's basically pretty simple. We have a manual action bar, and of interesting note, this is using the NativeScript theme core classes, the action bar class, which can be used on an action bar itself, but you can class it on a standard grid layout, and you can end up getting kind of a standard padding and kind of set up for an action bar as well. So this is like a manual action bar layout here. Modals do not have, on a native platform, they don't have action bars. So you end up, if you want some type of close or some type of header in your modal, you end up needing to lay that out yourself. So that is an example of how I do that often. Okay, so we have a modal here, and we want our home component to show it. So let's actually add a new method here, open modal, and we'll create a new button. And this is going to be open modal, and this is going to be down to that function, and we'll just add a class for good measure. If I use my mouse, I wouldn't run into that so much. Okay. And then inside home component here, there's a couple things we need to do. We want to import these two services from NativeScript Angular. This is the modal dialog service and the modal dialog options used to define some options that we're going to pass to the modal. So we'll type that as modal dialog options, and one of those is the context. And this is where you can pass in anything. So this could be any data object you want to pass to the modal. For this example, I'm just going to say prompt message, and I'm going to say data passed to modal. And then one of the other options is full screen. We're just going to set that to false for now. And then what we want to do is inject constructor and private modal. It's going to be modal dialog service, and that's going to give us what we need to open this modal. So it's going to be this modal.show modal. And then we want to pass it our component. So we just created that modal component. So we're just going to import that. See how I just naturally don't use the spaces on the imports. I don't think I'll ever get used to that. Okay, modal component. So we're going to pass that in here. And then we pass in our options. And then this is a promise that gets resolved. Let me speed that down a little bit. And this will allow us to pass data back to the caller. So if we open the modal, say you log the user in, they type their login info, and then close the modal, you want to grab that data and then maybe log the user in from your caller here. This is kind of a way to do that. So when we call the modal and open it in our constructor, because we inject modal dialog params, we can grab the params context, and in this case, I'm grabbing prompt message because that's what I coded on that context object. Again, that can be anything you want to pass to that modal. And then close, we have wired up to our modal component, kind of manually created action bar there that's going to close that modal. You could have a save button or something that actually grabs data that maybe a user entered and pass that back. Here with the this.params close callback. So that data is going to pass that stuff back to the caller. And with that in mind, see if we got enough to run it. We should. Let's have live sync going up. Okay. Let's queue back up live sync. And as far as live sync goes, I use it, but I don't use it all the time. Especially when you're creating new files. Like, they might work, but obviously if you're creating new files, it's going to queue live sync, and it's going to keep trying to, it's going to pick up a new file and reboot it. Yes, so we have an error. Yes, this is good. So, we're going to fix this in just a minute. But anyway, with live sync, if you're making style changes and messing with the TypeScript file or the view file, it's perfectly good. But I usually shut it down if I'm creating new files. So we have this really nasty error. In Angular 2, some of these can be like really ugly. But they have generally pretty good error messages, really, if you look at it. And this is actually telling us exactly what happened. So no provider for modal dialog service. Definitely, that's the case, because we do not have any provider set for modal dialog service. This is one of those services that needs to be provided on a per component basis. So if you're familiar with Angular 2 development in ng module, a lot of providers are included in these modules when you import them, and that relieves you from adding those to a provider's key on the component itself. This is really nice, but some need to be constructed on a per component construction basis. Modal dialog service is one of those. And again, this comes from NativeScript Angular itself, but each page that's going to show a modal needs to have modal dialog service in the providers because that is specific to that component. And I'm going to run this away. We should get another error if we're lucky. Actually, it'll run, but we should get an error when we do this. Yes, in fact, it crashed. How about that? I didn't know it crashed, but no view container ref, make sure you have the modal dialog host directed inside your component. Thank the NativeScript team for this. That is definitely what we're missing. So very subtle thing, and this is why I wanted to show modals. Modal dialog host is what we need. Any component that shows a modal must have that directive on the root style component. So I'm not putting it on an action bar. I'm actually putting it on the root of the layout container. So I haven't tested to see if it needs to be anywhere on the view. We won't test it right now, but I'd be curious if modal dialog host would actually work on any one of those view level elements. It'd be interesting. That's a good question. So let's see. Here. Where I go for docs on NativeScript Angular, there's definitely some awesome docs developing on NativeScript's docs site. And actually, I think you can go to nativescript.org/Angular. And that will take you to a specific spot here. And let's see, there's a documentation link, which is here. And so, there is some stuff here. These are actually really good. So there may be some stuff on dialogues I haven't checked here, because I usually always, and this is probably just from habit, I go to NativeScript Angular, the actual repo, and I go into the ng sample app. So this is where all the custom renderer is developed. But they have this ng sample app, which I've contributed a bit on. But inside, if you go inside the app directory and in examples, you'll see these examples here. One of them is modal. And so in here is where I will often go if I'm questioning something. And I'll look at how Alex or Christo actually set that up. And you can see they're actually had it set up almost identical to how I have it set up. This is exactly where I got that set up. So that's usually where I go. But definitely check out the NativeScript docs. That is building out pretty nicely. Okay, so we have our modal dialog host. We hit live sync. What happened? We lost connection with views. Let's just run it again. I see that from time to time. It's not super often, but occasionally live sync will lose its connection, so we'll just rerun it. And let's see if we're doing good on time. Cool. All right, modal, and we still get an error. So let's see what happened this time. Yes. So this is a good one. This is where looking at modals becomes very interesting in regard to Angular native specifically. So Angular has this thing where if a view file is created dynamically, it's got to be declared in the module in a certain way. It's what's known as a factory. I believe this error actually indicates that somewhere. If I can find it, detach loader. No component factory. Thank you. So that, yes, this is the indication right here. Now, if you see this in your Angular native apps, know exactly what this means. This will catch many people. This actually needs to be declared in entry components on the entry module. What I couldn't give you the most thorough explanation of entry components, but they are those that need to be created either sometimes dynamically through the router if they're lazy loaded, I believe. I'm going to stop right there because I don't know 100% on entry components, but this is exactly what the issue is. And because of this, in my other projects, Angular native projects, I will declare or define, I should say, a factory components convenience array, and I will import in any dynamically created components. And in this case, our modal component is one of those. And we're going to drop that inside factory components.
You're adding spaces there.
I know. See, if I see them, then I conform. But I tell you, that's okay. Factory components now and entry components, and then I think there actually is. We'll try it just there. I think we're going to end up needing it also in exports. But let me save that. Let's say it's building, doing something, and we'll probably get another crash. So now we've got yes. So another really useful error message. Component modal components, not part of any engine module, or the module has not been imported into your module. You're like, what? I have it in factory components. This can't be. This is a weird error that threw me in the beginning, but this also needs to be declared. And if it's not declared, it's exported. But let's see. That's it. So we have our modal now, finally. And so one of the peculiar things, of course, with modals, you need to define it in entry components, and then also declare that in your declarations. Now, of course, I have that components convenience array, and so it may be funny. It's like components, why don't I just store it inside that components array, right? Well, you don't need all the components that you declare inside entry components. For that reason, I split those two out into two different collections, and so I just tell myself if I'm creating a modal, I'm going to drop that in factory components. I don't ever have to worry about it again because it's already declared there in entry components. I should be careful about the word declared because that's a separate thing, but it's specified there in entry components. So I just put all my modals inside factory components, and I put all my components inside components. And working in that sense, you kind of relieve yourself from, again, having to keep up with two, now 4 enumerated lists, because factory components would potentially be all your dynamically created components like modals. Your declarations would be all your components, plus those dynamically created, and then exporting would be all your components. So those convenient arrays really help you in the long run when you start to scale the app out. All right, so we have a modal finally, and it's glorious. It's silky smooth. It is really nice. I love native modals. They're just really nice. So, and if we see in the console, we can see our data passed to modal happens when we open that modal, and we get nothing passed back, and that's because our closed callback is calling our caller, but we're actually not even doing anything with it. So actually, let's just log out our result, and let's just to complete the loop on how to talk back and forth through a modal in a native application. There's data passed to modal, there's passed something back. Really handy to know how to do, really useful in a native app. Okay, let's see.
You at a breakpoint?
Can I add a breakpoint?
No, are you at a stopping point?
Sure, I'm about to
I want to stop
here.
the stream,
okay.
And I'm going to restart. So I just wanted to catch you in between things.
Oh,
so.
sure. And in Windows Universal. So it uses an XML, which is a very specific and concise DSL language that abstracts all the views for Android, iOS, and Windows Universal. And so you can code in this really concise language, and it creates native UI elements out of that one single NativeScript XML view.
So you're using clearly typing HTML, but that's really just the NativeScript markup.
It's a great yes, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's something that's bothered me since day one, and it is because the parse5 DOM adapter needs a .html. Sounds silly and sounds like it could be coded around, but apparently it's a bigger issue than it sounds. But .html is required on those files currently as of today. Hopefully that will change because I think it is confusing to see NativeScript XML inside of a .html file.
There's a lot of attributes also that are in the XML, like the difference between Angular 2 attributes versus native are not much clear.
Sure. How could I explain that? So, yeah, for instance, looking at this view, like items is something that you would generally bind to in native. That's a NativeScript attribute. That's actually not Angular specific. Most of the things you see here are not Angular specific, actually. So parens tap is just an event that you can bind to on any NativeScript XML view layer. So we're actually just using Angular 2's event binding syntax to bind directly to that event on that element. It's actually not Angular specific. Angular just kind of provides you this way to do these bindings in this kind of nice, what I would call pretty elegant syntax. Does that help answer that?
Yeah, just that some of them aren't, some of them aren't. You gotta work them.
Yeah, I mean, in general, if you see brackets, that is a property binding. And if you see, of course, the parens, that's an event binding. And that's it. You actually don't need to know anything else outside of that. You see brackets, it's a property binding. Parens, event binding. And you can bind to any event that comes from NativeScript elements. So if you were to look in the docs at the user interface, actually a better place to look is the API reference. And for example, let's just look at UI button. Actually, let's look at segmented bar. And if you look at segmented bar, you'll see that there's some events that are here in the API reference, and you could bind to these in the view. So yeah, it's really just, if it's an event that is coming from that element, you can bind to it using Angular syntax. James, are we good? I don't know what's going on here. Okay, all right. All right, so we're going to get a little crazy here. We are going to create a anybody use Firebase? A little bit here and there. This is, I love Firebase. So this is like all the things that I love here in one. So we're going to call this Angular native create project. Firebase is Google's real-time database solution. You can actually, it's hosting too, so you can actually host web apps through here, and it's really slick. Huge shout out to David East and the team on this because it is really nice. But the real-time database you can access in the control panel on the left. There's storage, so it's just like Amazon S3, but you can store all files and anything related to your site in the storage area. And then there's options for hosting. And then there's native integration options, which is super cool. So we want to add Firebase to our iOS app to start. And when we click that button, the first thing it asks us is our iOS bundle ID. So that's a good opportunity to point you to where you get that in a NativeScript Angular native project, I will say. I need to keep referring to it as that. I actually love that name, and I hope it does stick. So that's inside the package, the root package. When you set up a Angular native project, you'll see this NativeScript ID. You can change this. So if you create a bundle on the iTunes Connects portal, and you create an app, of course, one of the first things you have to do is create a bundle ID, and that's what this is. So you can change that to whatever you create for your app. But for this case, I'm just going to use what it provided for me. We're going to add this. Just making sure that's shut. And when we skip to step 2, you might have subtly noticed that it downloaded the Google Service Info plist over here. And this is a critical file. We're going to drop this inside, if I can find it. No, it's here, here, here. And inside the app directory. So this is our project directory. Inside app resources, we have the key app files related to iOS or Android, and we just want to drop that Google Service Info plist inside of that app resources. This is what's going to create some part of our Firebase integration. The other part is the plugin. So we're going to install from npm, I think it is this, NativeScript plugin Firebase, and we're going to save that to our package dependencies. This is a super nice plugin that Eddie created, really amazing author of many plugins, not just for NativeScript, but for Cordova as well. And he has this super nice post-install script that will help you set it up. So it's asking, are you using iOS? Yes. We're going to use Android? Yes. Remote config, I'm not going to go into the details here, but we're not going to use that. We're not going to use Firebase messaging. We're not going to use storage at the moment. We are going to use Facebook authentication only because Android at the moment requires Facebook authentication to create some of the link, I have come to find out, and then no to Google authentication. So that installed our NativeScript Firebase plugin, and now what we want to do is create a service that will help us interact with that. I'm going to create a new folder here called services. Inside here, I'm going to create a new file called firebase.service.ts, and for good measure, I'm going to go ahead and create an index.ts file, which is going to serve as kind of a standard place to re-export out these things. And instead of coding this all up from scratch, go ahead and get us off to a kickstart here. And this is what our Firebase service is going to look like. We just import injectable. It's just a standard Angular 2 service. We're requiring in the NativeScript plugin Firebase at the top, and we're going to use that inside of our constructor here, and it's going to call init. That's going to initialize the Firebase real-time database with our app. We're going to pass persist to true. This helps create a local cache, and then we get this callback when it actually creates that link. And then the other thing is our index file. So in index, just like I do for the components, I use an app provider's convenient array here too, much for the same reason that I did for the components array. So again, we could just enumerate out other services that we scale out inside the services directory, and then all we need to deal with is this app provider's block here. Okay. So we have that, and then we need to make sure that we actually have our app providers inside of our main bootstrap. So there's many different ways you could do this. You could have a different module altogether that wraps your services and providers and such, but we're just going to import it here. So this is going to be import, there's our space, and services, and in this time we're just going to grab from index, which is what makes this nice. That's where our app providers is, and that is what we need. So that right there is going to let Angular know when it bootstraps that Firebase service is something that we do want to provide for our app. And then the other thing, I'm just going to run this actually straight up, and this time this is another important key. Anytime you install a plugin or use a CocoaPod of any sort, and that plugin uses many CocoaPods, you want to run TNS emulate iOS versus LiveSync. Emulate iOS is actually going to actively pull down these new pods and install them. If you were to run LiveSync, it wouldn't do that, because LiveSync actually just does a build. Oh yeah. LiveSync just does a build of
It just grabs your TypeScript and runs the build.
Exactly. I don't know what it's complaining about here. Hang on, Firebase. Oh, spelled it wrong. I put plural there. It's singular. There we go. Okay. So yeah, again, TNS emulate is going to actively pull down those pods. Really key thing to keep in mind. I've seen many people get tripped up on this. They'll install a plugin and they'll be like, it's not working, and actually the CocoaPod will not be installed at all. And it's because either they were using LiveSync or running it without ensuring that those pods. So you know this by when you see this, installing pods, updating local specs. This is actually going to download those pods, setting up our Xcode project to actually have those linked correctly. So this is a key point. We'll give that just a minute. Depending on how many you use, it can take just a minute. but generally it's not too bad. So there we can see when they show up in green, that means they are newly installed. If they were already installed, they show up as white. So just kind of give you a visual cue as to what is going on. Anybody know what's going to happen here? We have a Firebase service. We're calling init. We've got a log that should supposedly log out when it initializes. Did anybody think that's actually going to happen? Anybody know why that might not happen?
It's a stream, it's not gonna happen.
What's that?
It's just a continuous stream of data. It's an open socket.
So it's a good point in and of itself, but this is actually related to the fact that we have told Angular that we have this provider for our app, but it's never being instantiated because we don't ever inject it anywhere. We haven't injected it anywhere yet. So let's drop back in live sync mode, and we need to make one important change here. We can inject this anywhere, but for now we're just going to inject it inside of app component, Firebase service, and let's import that. And for kicks, let's use a space. Services index, and this will be Firebase service. So Angular 2, again, just an important thing, those services don't get constructed unless you actually inject them anywhere. Providing just makes sure that the DI system knows that that is a valid token to the DI system, which you want to make sure you have all those set up for your app, for any service that you use. But yeah, you want to inject it somewhere to use it. So now that we have it injected.
Angular 1 is the same, works exactly the same. If you don't inject it, it's
Never instantiated.
yeah, the constructor, the factory is never called.
Yeah, it's a pretty important, that's caught so many people.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's,
Angular 1 has the, you have the run blocks, that's a great place for doing that, but Angular 2, everything is a component, so you would just have a start component that you would inject everything you want to start up.
right. So we've got a lot of great stuff going on here now. Let me see if I can get this a little prettier. I still read that okay? A little prettier. So we can see some things are happening here now. We've got Firebase crash reporting was successfully enabled. Cool. We got Firebase analytics in our app now. Amazing. We can see successfully created Firebase analytics app delegate there. What else we got here? Our key thing, Firebase init, done. So now we have verification that our service was properly instantiated, and we have an active Firebase real-time database working now. So this is really cool, success. But we want to do a couple more interesting things with this because right now we have no database. So let's create a database real quick. I'm going to call this list, and inside of list, this is another interesting thing with Firebase. I'm going to enumerate out, these are all objects, by the way, in Firebase. This is like a object document store, and so arrays don't exist here. There's a reason why they didn't do that. I'll let you guys find the answer to that. But it mainly has to do with keying items because you need to have a proper ID and key for each item in this collection. And one thing that's interesting that Firebase will do is if you were to push an array to Firebase, it will create 0, 1, 2, 3, often for an array collection. But if those keys are strings or numbers, random, it's going to see those as object keys when you actually get those values back. So a better way to describe that is if we were to put 0 here, which is going to amount to the key for this item that we're going to add in the database, and then our next item was 1 and our next item was 2, when Firebase gives that back, it's going to give it back as an array, which is interesting. But if those are random values for the key, it's going to return it back as object keys. That's an important thing to realize with Firebase. And so I'm just going to create these same items that we manually had. So we have a list, which is our key table, if you will, in Firebase, and we're going to add another one. We're just going to give it a random key, and we're going to call this item, that is the key name, and this is going to be item 2. And we'll just add one more And let's add title, and this is going to be item 3. Okay, so now we have a list that we can grab from Firebase and wire to that, but there is something we're going to run into, and actually let me actually do it for you guys first so you can see what's happening. So I want to inject the Firebase service inside of our list component because we're going to end up using that. This is going to be back one services Firebase.service. Actually, we could use index here. It'll be fine. Firebase service. We're going to end up injecting that here. And we'll use Firebase service. And in fact, we'll make this public right now. I'll tell you why in a moment. And let's see. So we have this running. I think we have live sync running. And what we want to do now is actually grab that list. So there's nothing that's doing anything with Firebase right now other than initializing it. So we want to actually create, when that Firebase initialization is done, we want to initialize our sync point with that list that we just created. So we'll do init sync. And what we're going to use for that, Firebase, I think I'll grab my snippet. It's add value event listener, I believe. Yeah. So this is one way you can sync with a value from Firebase. There's another one that's add child event listener, I think it is, or maybe just add event listener. But so initialization is going to get done. We're going to call init sync. This is going to call add value event listener, and then it's going to pass in our path to our table, if you will, in Firebase. And that's list at the root. And then we're going to create a function inside here to actually deal with the result that we get back. And actually, I'll just use this straight up. Okay, so we have sync list. We're using our bind syntax to this, so we actually key into an observable that we're going to create on this service, and that's going to expose it to the rest of our app. So if you notice, we're kind of doing what we did in the list component just a minute ago. We're actually creating items, but we're going to delegate that now to the service. Actually, we can copy and paste that directly from our list component. Grab this. We're not going to need that there anymore. And we're going to drop it inside of here. And let's take behavior subject out of there because we're not using that there anymore. And instead we want to use it here. And so now we got items, we got an observable here. Results, sync list. Any questions on this real quick? Are you guys following this? You kind of see what's going on? I know I'm going through this at a pretty high rate. But is this making sense? Everybody in queue? Okay. So sync list is going to fire now right when initialization is done. That's going to grab our values from our list and emit those out on that observable from our Firebase service. And we're going to use that inside our list component now. So we actually don't need any of this anymore. And we'll leave add around because we're going to use that when we integrate ngrx, which we're actually going to do after this in a moment. But, and actually we don't have that anymore. And so now what we're going to do is bind directly to the Firebase service that we injected, which is public, which is why I made it public. You can do this a number of different ways, but this is going to actually queue and bind right to items from our Firebase service. And with that, what are we running here? We got live sync going. Let's see what happens. We do have live sync going. Okay, so you'll notice this happens in live sync mode when you're dealing with Firebase. Down at the bottom, you already ran init. When you get that, just rerun it. Firebase and the simulator have a couple things, and when that actually queues up and runs, if it already ran through an initialization phase, when it relaunches the app, it will actually get that error. And this is our lovely TypeScript friend James over here who can definitely solve this TypeScript problem right now, but I'm not going to bug him about it right now. I'm actually going to show you a shortcut to get around that. because at the moment we don't care about strict type checking. What? Yeah. At the moment we're gonna. Yeah. We'll get back to it. I love TypeScript, but for sometimes you just need to develop, and that particular error, we want to get past that. So we see that error, we're going to see it. TypeScript's going to still complain about it, but setting that no emit on error to false is going to allow our app to still build and run. Thank goodness for that setting. Escape, yeah, exactly. So let's see. So, okay, we got init done here. We have some things happening, but we probably shouldn't have a list yet. And the reason we don't have a list right now, I was seeing if there was something in the log actually pointing to it. So init done, created. We got init sync, and we got this happening, and it's on list. I thought sometimes it might show you an error as to what's happening. I think it happens when you try to write, but right now we have rules. By default, Firebase will set auth not equal to null on read and write on your table. We actually want read to true, and we're going to get crazy and set write to true too. I wouldn't recommend this, but I mean, you might have a public app that you want everybody to be able to write to. I don't know. It happens. So we're going to publish that, and your security rules are defined as public. Anyone can read or write. Yes, we know. So with that, let's relaunch our app real quick. Let's see if we get anything now. So what was happening before is it was trying to read from list, but there was no authentication, and that was not pulling anything from our database for that reason. Okay, are we up and going? So yes, so we have live database bound to our NativeScript view. We've done this in less than an hour so far, and that actually we've only been talking about Firebase for less than 20 minutes. I don't know. So this is crazy, honestly, that you can get this going this quick. This is a testament to Firebase, by the way. Just an amazing service setup. So we've got a Firebase list here. Obviously, they're in reverse order. We're going to deal with that later. We actually have a we have a way to deal with that too. But for now, where we want to take this is go back to my. Yeah.
In your DOM, you say Firebase dot, and that's like you attach it rather than attaching Firebase to a local in your model, and then just attach it to that. So you do it right there. Do you have any things on that?
Yeah. I will. We're going to change that up in just a minute too. That was kind of a shorthand. You can certainly do that. I would say in general, ideally what you want to use here is ngrx. You want to use a store, and there's a really nice way to kind of handle this through your components. So we're gonna integrate that, I think, next, and you'll see where I go. So yeah, that was kind of a shorthand just to show you that.
Can I ask you a
Sure.
follow-up to that? So would you say it's probably bad practice to talk directly to your service from a template?
I don't think so, honestly. I'm gonna step on a limb. It depends on the use case. I mean, if I've certainly done some views where I set a service public on the injection and bind straight to it. To me, it's kind of nice because you don't have extra code to set just yet another variable that you didn't need, because it's already creating a variable when you inject that service. So why create yet another variable that references yet another variable inside that service? Instead, declare it public, bind directly to it, and you've removed the need for one extra variable. It just depends on the use case. But again, in general, where we're going is ngrx store, and it provides a really nice way to kind of deal with this consistently across the board. And I would say it's definitely best practice the way that it goes about it, or guides you. Okay, so we're going to take a break on this, on Firebase. I'm going to show you just something fun off the cuff. I'm actually going to show you how to integrate a plugin from NPM, and it actually is a custom NativeScript element. It was built just for vanilla NativeScript, but we're going to make it work in Angular Native and show you how easy that is. And this is generally the case for almost all custom components that you may find on NPM for NativeScript. This is a plugin that I created just for vanilla. It uses the Facebook shimmer effect. It's a really cool, just nice little touch. We're going to install this. I think that's what it's called. Pretty sure, yeah. So that was really quick. This Wi-Fi is awesome.
Maybe it's cache.
Yeah, that was sweet. All right, so now we've got the shimmer effect plugin installed. And what we want to do is, this is actually a lot easier than you would think. You can drop this code in anywhere, really. You could drop it in this main module. You could drop it in app component. I generally drop it in the app root component just because these are component level things that they're exposing to the view. So I generally will drop it in just the root component so I can kind of see at the root level what's being exposed as elements. So what's happening here is we're importing register element from NativeScript Angular's element registry. We're registering the shimmer element straight from the NativeScript shimmer plugin. So we can see that it takes a require, and then we're grabbing shimmer, which is a native, not a native, it's a JavaScript class that's on that plugin. Just to prove that, so you don't just take my word at will. NativeScript shimmer. Here is the plugin on GitHub, and if we look at the iOS JavaScript file, we can see that it exposes a class called shimmer. So anytime you're dealing with a plugin, NativeScript plugin, you can register that element if it's a component element. I think I probably just peaked your levels like to the max. So yeah, it's just grabbing that class, and we're just saying make that available to Angular Native. So now we can actually use that out of the box. And where do we want to drop it? Let's drop it in our home component. Home component here. And we're just going to swap out our view. Actually, not that much of it. We'll do this. And just change up the layout here a little bit. Similar, same view stuff. We've got open list, open modal. Make sure I'm still binding to the same thing. And then we've got a shimmer area down here at the bottom, which is stack layout, and we've got our shimmer element, and inside we've got a label. So this is a cool plugin because you can just pass a label inside of it, and it's going to make that label shimmer, just like the Facebook shimmer effect. We're going to add just a couple classes to help it look pretty, and I'm just going to drop those in here. And oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention that I'll just add since I'm adding these classes in. If our app is still up, our list is really ugly, right? You guys have been looking at this the whole time and I didn't even mention it. Super ugly. But the NativeScript theme core comes with some really handy classes you can throw on a list view and make it look pretty nice. So we're going to do that actually real quick while we have the chance. And the main level list view class is list group, and the class for anything inside is list group item, and that alone is going to make our list look really nice. Okay, so this time we installed another plugin, so we don't want to run live sync, we want to run TNS emulate iOS. This is to ensure that the Shimmer CocoaPod is installed correctly. So as I mentioned before, anytime you do that, make sure you do that. That will, again, bites many people. I don't know why that is, actually. Seems like LiveSync could maybe install the CocoaPod, but it's a pretty involved process, so maybe that's why they keep it out of the LiveSync. I don't know. I could see ways where that could be improved, right? And maybe it could determine if a pod wasn't installed and installed if it wasn't.
Ionic has the same problem.
Okay. Yeah, Cordova's kind of, I mean, you generally, yes, I've run into that kind of thing. So note, as I mentioned earlier, installing Shimmer shows up in green because that's a new one that's installed, but everything in white was already installed as a CocoaPod. So again, just a good visual cue, kind of give you a what's up as to what happened. It's a good indicator too. If you install a plugin, you can tell if it's going to work you know, if you don't see it installing that pod or mentioning anything about that plugin, you might have a problem. And then this time, let's see, what did we do? We changed up our home component, so we should get a little different look here, if we're lucky. Hey, what do you know? So this is cool. So down at the bottom here, we have a nice, silky smooth native effect going on. This is very slick. That plugin actually comes with the ability to turn it on and off. I'm not going to wire that up right now, but you can bind to enabled on that component and literally just flick it on and off. It's really nice, easy to use. Again, our modal still works, and does our list still work? Yes, and look, our list looks way better. I mean, right? And all we did was add those 2 classes from that theme course. That's been really nice to have that. So let's see, we did not wire up our add. So I'm going to jump back to that now that we can see. So we just kind of skimmed past that real quick, but that was how easy it was to integrate a custom component in Angular Native. Really simple. Just to recap that real quick, because that's really critical. Register element, import it. You register that element. Whatever, you could actually call this anything. If you wanted to call this Shimmer Me Pretty, like you could call that Shimmer Me Pretty, right? And that will be the element that you use inside the NativeScript XML. So we're just using the same class name that we get from that plugin. Really simple. Okay. All right, let's see where we want to go. Are we to ngrx? Yes. I haven't even been referring to my slides at all. This is terrible. We set up routes. We did that. Hey, let's just do a quick recap because we've gone through a lot of stuff. We set up routes. We kind of reorged our project to be a lot more scalable, a lot easier to work with. We set up a list view, so we added a list component so we could navigate to that. We added the list group and list group item classes later just now, but they made it look a lot better. We set up a modal just for kicks. We discussed through all that crazy stuff with entry components and declarations. And then we set up Firebase. That was done pretty quickly. We just installed the plugin. We created a brand new project on Firebase. We installed the info plist and our Google services. We haven't run on Android yet, but we're going to do that hopefully in a minute. Talked a bit about zone. We're going to get more into this in just a minute when we get to ngrx. And custom plugin registration with our shimmer effect. And now we're to my favorite part. This I just love. We're going to install ngrx core, ngrx store, and we're going to get ngrx effects, and we're going to save all those. This is a super nice library. I kind of live by it today. It just adds so much niceties to the structure of your app. It relieves dependency injection throughout your app because really all you ever need to inject in components is store, because you just dispatch actions. And so your components become a little dumber in the sense that they just send actions out, and then your services pick up those through effects, and then those effects cause things to happen and actually cause the work to be done. So we'll actually set this up, and you can see this in action. So I'm going to grab this because there's a little bit of boilerplate here, so I'm not going to bore you with typing every single line out. But how I like to do this is drop in a section for ngrx here, and let's talk this through. So right off the bat, I'm importing store action reducer from ngrx store. I'm grabbing effect and actions from effects here. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then I'm importing some RxJS operators here. There's a nicer way to do these operators. If you use a lot of RxJS operators, you can add a file called, like, say, RxJS operators. There actually is a sample of this on Angular 2 seed. I think I just added it. I'm getting off topic. But you can add a file and then just put all your operators in there and include that once, and you never have to add or import those operators again. So for simplicity, I'm just importing them here because we're going to use these straight up. I add a category here. This is a way just for logging purposes. Again, this is kind of my style creeping in here, but I add a category because I use that as a prefix on all Redux actions. It allows and makes sure that all those actions are unique strings throughout, because every single service I have has a unique category. And I can further use that in analytics, for instance, to make sure that all those are clearly defined too and don't collide with something else. So that's just kind of my style there, but I'm defining an interface for the state of our Firebase service now. So now our Firebase service is gonna provide a state, and that state is gonna be these items, okay? And we're gonna define that state on our global state called list. I'm gonna get to that in a minute, but right now we're just defining what the state of our Firebase service looks like. And so our interface here is just saying we have an array of items. We're setting an initial state, which is actually implementing our Firebase state, and we're just initializing those to an empty array of items. These are all things that we did in the service right here. We initialize our behavior subject to an empty array. So this is just kind of doing the same thing in a more structural and in a bit more formal way. So now we're defining actions. I've got an add action that our component is going to be able to dispatch, and that's going to be when we want an item added. And then our service is going to pick that up. And then when the sync happens, it's going to dispatch out sync update. And that's what's actually going to update the state here. So I'm kind of jumped a couple lines past for a moment there, but you can see our interface is defined for our actions, and then our actions actually use that interface. Why do we do this? Simple, because without this, if I do this as any, and I use these actions anywhere throughout the code base, if I do dot, I get nothing. That is not handy or useful at all. So you want to be able to import these actions and get IntelliSense across the board, no matter where you use it throughout the app. That is exactly why you want to do this. Actually, let me undo that. All right, so now with that in mind, we actually get this nice IntelliSense. So we know exactly what actions are available from that particular action set. So we get sync update here. I won't go into too much details of what reducers look like, but this is defining a reducer which is going to take that action and it's going to spit out a brand new state. So one of the key things with ngrx store is you want all your data to be immutable. It needs to be brand new state that spits out. State comes in, new state spits out. This is what allows immutable data and the on push to work, because your references are always changing. If you were to compare this object to another object that gets spit out on that state, it's always going to be new when the state changes because it was immutable. So that reference is always going to not equal when new state comes out. This is what allows this on push to actually really help you in performance for the change detection. So that is basically what our ngrx store integration looks like. Pretty low surface area, really, for what you get. It gets you a lot out of the box, and we'll get into that in a moment. Let me get our effects here. So ngrx effects wasn't out when I first got into ngrx store, and I was always confused with ngrx store because something like this was not there in the beginning, and this was the missing link for me. These effects allow you to grab these actions and then in turn do things, do work. That's key, because before it's like you dispatch an action and then your reducer picked that up and was supposed to just spit out state on that, but there's all this stuff that happens in between. You need to be able to dispatch an action and actually do something in the process. There could be many things. Like for instance, when we add, we may want to dispatch another action that actually shows a loader on screen. When that add is done and the sync happens, we dispatch that sync update, and we might want that to be picked up to actually turn our loader off, for instance. So these are what's known as side effects in Redux, if you will. When actions get dispatched, there's intermediate things that need to happen in between. And that's where ngrx effects comes into aid here. So this is a simple injectable service that we're going to pass into our bootstrap method. We're injecting store, we've got actions, and then we've got our Firebase service. Now, this is an aha moment, because our Firebase service that's being injected here means that we don't need to inject it in our app component. Remember that weird thing where we didn't even get our service being injected? or being constructed because it wasn't injected, you don't need to worry about that stuff anymore just by default when you start using ngrx effects, because almost every service that you have a side effect on is probably in turn going to inject that service just by the nature of it. And so because of that, you're going to automatically ensure that those services get instantiated. You don't have to worry about injecting those in like a root component or something like that. So we need an add method in our Firebase service here. So let's do add, and we need a value that's coming in, and this value is going to basically pass to, actually I think we called that item, but we'll call it value. So that's all you need to do to actually push data to the Firebase real-time database. We're just going to call Firebase push. We're defining what table or path in our document store we want to push it to, and we're pushing our value, and that's going to push it out. Notice we don't do anything else after that. This is a, that is a promise that we could handle the result, but we don't need to. Because we have a sync set up on list. And because we have a sync set up on list, this function is automatically going to get called anytime that database changes. So if we push a value in, this function is going to fire. And so we know every time that that sync happens, we can emit our sync update there. And that's going to update our state. And that's going to allow us to use that value, that observable, which we get from ngrx store in our view. So to stop blabbering about this, let's put this in action. And oh yeah, I'm going to get rid of this for now. Actually, no, you can't see that. Okay. I didn't want to show that yet. Okay. So this .store, it's complaining because we actually have an injected store. We need that here. Okay, so we have our store, and we're dispatching this action, and it's basically just sending out a payload of our results array. This results array is always going to be whatever results are in our Firebase database. So we're just sending that payload out, and what happens when that's dispatched? Our reducer picks it up. So our reducer picks up Firebase sync update, and what does it do? It spits out new state. So, and it spits out exactly the state that we defined. This is our interface for the Firebase state. It's got items key. It's an array. So what are we doing? We're spitting out a brand new object with the items key in our action.payload, which equals our items array. And that's what's happening there. There's many different ways you can do these reducers too. This is just a simple example, really. Okay, so just to kind of recap what we got going on, we've got ngrx integrated. We don't have any red lines, so it looks like we got stuff imported right. We've defined an interface for our state. We've got initial state going in. We've defined some actions. Of course, you can scale this out infinitely. We just got 2 actions right now. And then this is actually where our actions are defined. I'm sorry, that's just the interface. And then we've got our reducer, and our service now wants to use this. So there's a couple different ways we could do this. One way, and actually it's kind of probably what I prefer, we're going to define this items as an observable. We're going to import observable from RxJS observable. And let's get that. And observable wants a type there. We'll just say it is an array of any type of object. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to select the state off the store. And select is an operator you get with store that lets you get an observable, and that's going to let you observe the state throughout all these changes, and then it'll allow us to bind to it. Before we do that, let's make sure we have our store set up here. And what we want to do is up top here, I'm just going to group these up here. We're importing store module from ngrx store and effects module. So again, we installed ngrx store, we installed ngrx effects. We want to integrate those modules into our import here. And so we're going to say store module, and we're going to say provide store. And what provide store, this is where we define the state. that our Redux setup is gonna use. And you can key this however you want. This is where you get the opportunity to kind of define how you want the state to look. For us, I'm going to define a key called list. That is going to basically be what our list is for our list binding purposes. And then I'm going to bind, that needs to be set to the reducer. So we're going to import, let's see, we got services index. Oh, isn't that so nice? When you import from an index, right, because the index exports out everything from that service, you get all that stuff. So there's our Firebase reducer. We're going to set Firebase reducer there. So that is going to make sure that our list in our store, whenever we dispatch actions against, those actions will spit out state, and it will use that reducer for the list. I hope I'm not losing anybody on this. I know it's late. Hang with me. So effects module, next, I'm just going to add our Firebase effects here. And that is going to make sure that our Firebase effects actually come into play. Okay? In essence, what that does is, of course, allow that service to instantiate when the app is bootstrapped. And of course, what does that mean? It goes back to what I was just saying a minute ago. Because this is going to instantiate on Bootstrap, just by nature of it being run as an effect by ngrx effects, it's going to naturally construct that service, and it injects Firebase service because that's going to instantiate that service. So again, it's relieving us naturally from having to inject that anywhere else. Okay, so we have a number of things going on here. In ngrx store, we're setting up a list. We're setting up side effects for that service. We've got those set up down here. Now we want to actually interact with that. So we basically have kind of gotten this set up in play, but now we kind of want to interact with it. So what we want to do is set our items to the observable of that list. So we want to observe that list state that we just defined. So we can do that here. We're going to say this.items, and we're going to say store.select. And select just takes a string, or I'm sorry, not select, takes a string of the key that we defined on the state. Okay? So select returns an observable. So all we're saying is that items that our Firebase service is going to provide is going to be observable that we can now bind to in our views, and it is going to be a live real-time observable to our Firebase state, because anything that changes is going to change that state, and anything, of course, that's subscribing to that observable is going to be able to get those changes. So in our list component now, we still have Firebase injected, and we're still using Firebase here straight on item. So another way to do this would be to actually just use items here, and instead use items here. Actually, in this case, it's going to be list, because we want it to be directly to our list state. And let's import observable here from RxJS observable. And of course this is going to be array of any. And inside here, now we can import ngrx store and use that inside of our component now and relieve our component from injecting the service. Okay, and this gets back to what you were asking a question about: is it standard or would it be advised to inject a service and bind to that directly? This is really how I would advise doing it, because you don't want to get into the situation where you have all these injectable services spread out throughout your app, inject into all these different components. Eventually, you're going to run into a cyclic dependency, and it's going to be really annoying. It's happened to me, and if you instead rely on store, your state, to be injected, you don't have to have all these different services, because usually what you need from those services is data, right? And usually that data, if you use ngrx store, can be observed. So the only thing you almost ever need injected in your components now is just store, because it's going to allow you to grab that And so in here, we're going to say this.list equals store.select, and that's going to be our list. So that is an observable of our Firebase state, and I'm just going to take this out of here because we actually don't. We're going to go the standard route, and instead of injecting Firebase to grab that, we're going to use store directly.
Another reason, a strong reason in a big system that you want to essentially wrap things in injectable services is that your components shouldn't know how, they should only know what. Your talk tonight's a great example. You've done lists now 4 or 5 different ways. In reality, you could have started off creating a service, that exposed CRUD operations on a list.
Right.
How that service persists the data does not matter to the client.
Right. So yeah, to that point exactly. So this add function that we're going to have on our list component is going to be completely dumb. We don't even know what that does when we dispatch it, but we're going to dispatch an action here when add happens. So it's actually not going to do any work. It's just going to dumbly say, send this action out. I don't even know what you're going to do, but just do that. And this is kind of, again, the beauty of ngrx store here. So we're going to import, oh, actually we already have our index there. So we can get our Firebase actions from there. And we want to dispatch our Firebase action. And this will be add. And then we want to pass a payload of something, right? We want to pass a new item. And it'd be really cool if we could actually keep the item enumerated in order from what those items were. How the heck would we do that? Because we have an observable object, we don't know what the value is. You can get the value. There's a trick to that, and I use this a lot. It's this.store take 1, and let me make sure I got the take operator here. What take 1 is doing is saying subscribe, get that value, and then unsubscribe. Really handy. I use it a lot with ngrx store for this type of thing. So we're just going to, our state is going to pass back. We're actually going to, this is a way to grab the entire state. So you can actually look at it in its form, in its current state at this very moment. You can look at everything that you have on the state. And so we're going to say, what do we need? We need our, we actually just need the total length of the array. And what do we got? The payload needs to be those items which have a title and its item. Let's use this. And we want it to be in line with the others. And so we're going to say state dot, and what was that key that we defined on the state for our list? It was list. So our state at this form, now I could have an interface that I put on here and would give me IntelliSense on that, but I'm just going off of memory here. So we got state.list, and on list, we defined items. So our Firebase service had items in that actual state, and then that's going to be the length, and then we want a +1 to keep it in line. So we now should have items that will be enumerated in the exact order that we had before. They will be out of order, but they should have the correct number. So let's see, we've got, so always double check your view binding when you change this up. But now we've got an observable that is set to the observable from our ngrx store. And it is called list, but list is just list. That's the key that we gave our Firebase service. So our Firebase items are actually in a thing called items, right? So we want to actually put parens around this. This is list, our observable. Async pipe to subscribe to it. Question mark because we don't know the value of it yet until it's subscribed. And now we're going to say items, and that is going to be our new binding based off of ngrx store. List, subscribe. We can now observe all those changes that happen from that live real-time database, Firebase, and those items is what we want from that state. So let's see what we're missing here. All right, we've got an action wired up, so when we click on add in our action bar, it should dispatch that action. If we go back to Firebase service and look at our Firebase effects. We got a side effect that's going to happen. So when that add action fires, what's going to pick it up? Not our reducer. Our side effect is going to pick it up. It's going to say, that was an add action that just happened. And I'm going to grab that and I'm going to do work. I'm going to grab the Firebase service. I'm going to add the payload to the Firebase database here. We're going to push it out. And what's that going to cause to happen? It's going to cause this add a value event listener to fire. Our data is going to be synced, and then it's going to dispatch out this sync update. But there's a kink here, and I'm going to intentionally run it with the kink in place. And let's see, we just installed plugins. They're not Cocoa Pods, so we actually should be able to do live sync at this point. Let's see what I have done so far. It's going to work. That was a big piece right there. I'll just kind of review what we got. Anybody could take a guess at what's going to happen? Probably by the way I'm acting, we're probably going to not get data, but I mean, why would we not get data? Based on this, if we look at this just straight up, we've got initialization, we got actions that are firing from our component, we got a side effect that's picking up that action and is causing our service to do work. We're pushing that value out to Firebase, and this value event listener is going to fire, but we're not going to get any data binding update. We should get the first view. We'll see. We'll see what happens here. Let's make sure I don't have any errors. So we get the first view. Now that makes sense because that was synced pretty quickly and we're not dealing with a lot of data. However, that might not happen for you depending on how much data you got happening at that point. What's key that's happening here is zones. You got a third-party plugin integration point here and a callback is happening. So you got something that's happening from the outside world. It's calling back into Angular, and it's pushing out an observable, but it might not be in the zone. So if we send this add action, we send an add action, but nothing happened. But look at in our database, we actually got an item.
If you refresh the app, you can see it.
You would. You would, but that's not what we want at all.
No, that just shows you that you needed to make whatever Angular 2 calls a digest cycle happen.
So,
Yeah, what's up with that assign missing?
oh, that's James Churchill's fault. That's a TypeScript question. No. We just I don't know if you missed that point, but we bypassed that error by setting no emit on error to false. That's an ES6 thing, object.assign, and so by default the TypeScript definitions that are loaded in here don't have those. So we could add those to get rid of that error, but right now we're not concerned with it. So yeah,
use core JS for that typically?
you could, yeah. I think there's another one now too. I feel like there's been several.
Well, and what version of TypeScript?
I don't know. You were. Oh, this is 1.8.10.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So if he was using TypeScript 2, they now have a new library speech compiler option that allows you to selectively pull in ES6 like API groupings, if you will. So, and I don't know them off the top of my head, but you can pull in the API part of ES6 that would have a sign and still target ES5.
Yes.
Well, what you're telling the compiler at that point is you know at runtime that that's going to be available, so consider it to be available at compile time. But you can't do that because you're using 1.8.
Yes. Maybe we'll go to 2.0. So the really crucial point, we're kind of coming in on a close here, and I don't want to keep you guys too late, but we've actually done pretty good on time. I wasn't sure I'd be able to get through all this, but this is going pretty well. So another thing, we did modified here in the database, but we didn't get that modification in our list. We should have, because we're syncing to this list. What is happening? This will bite many people also in Angular Native. Key point, third-party plugins, when you integrate callbacks from them, if those callbacks occur, you might get that to trigger in a view update. Don't rely on it. it's not reliable because depending on the timing, you might hit just that slight point where it's outside the zone and you got an outside thing coming in and no view is going to happen because it was outside the zone. So what do we want to do? We want to actually inject ng-zone, and we want to make sure this is run inside of Angular's zone. So ng-zone comes from the core, and all we need to do to use it is run, and we're just going to drop our dispatch inside that to make sure that when that sync update payload hits our state, all that happens inside the zone. Let's save that.
So like digest number one.
Yeah, you know, it honestly, it's the same thing. I don't see anything different. I mean,
Zone.run is the same as scope.apply.
but not to bash it, because honestly, it's much more elegant. I will say that it is much more elegant.
Yeah, it's only 3 characters instead of 7.
That's true.
It's also not recursive, the digest cycles, it's always top down, and so you won't get caught in these like endless digest cycles. That's what I've heard.
Yeah. No, it's way more improved. I guess it's kind of the same concept, but way better. So, okay, we have this running now. We have it inside ng-zone. Hopefully, we get real-time updates. So this is where things are super cool, right? Wow, I mean, that is updating instantaneously. That is a Firebase server somewhere in the Bay Area. Maybe it's in Portland, I don't know. But it's literally pinging and it's updating our database in this emulator at that. Live feed update, pretty cool. So does our add button work? Yeah, it works. And look at it, it's actually using enumerated values. You can't quite see it because they're kind of out of order, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, cool. So that actually is working. And how did we get that? Just to recap, in our list, we're actually taking one from the store. We're grabbing the state. It's basically a snapshot of the state. It's actually not a snapshot. It actually is really the state. If you were to take the state and modify it at that point, bad. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that because it should be immutable all the time. So don't ever take one from the store and start mutating all that state. Bad. But we're using it in this case because we're just using it to simply grab the length of our current item state at that point in time to actually just spit out that item. So what else do we want to do? We want to just order it real quick. So cool. Let's install Lodash and use Lodash to do that. And with Lodash, maybe it'll give us a TypeScript error. Maybe. But I don't know. Maybe not. We're just going to take results. Oh, let's import it first. Import from Lodash. And what do we want? We want order by. It is going to give red on that, but it's still going to run because we have hijacked it. Order by, we're going to pass results. And what do we want to order it by? The title. And what do we want to order it in? Ascending. And with that in mind, we need to run it again because we stopped it to install that. Again, that was no CocoaPod that was installed, so we should be able to run live sync with that. Just keep that in mind. Again, the takeaway. If you install plugins, CocoaPods, that type of thing. Oh, it is. Cannot find module Lodash. James, you can step in on that one. No, I'm sure we could install types for that and we could get past that. That's a great point. Yes, absolutely. So let's look at them. CocoaPods.
You've heard of pod people though, right?
Yeah, that was the original, whatever. That original
Body
type.
snatchers?
Yeah, Invasion of Body Snatchers, the really old one, right? That was the pods.
I'll show you two things. So not.
It's my old age, because that one's what was that movie from? The 60s?
So CocoaPods are just like, consider them the NPM registry of Objective-C libraries. Our Android Arsenal is exactly the same for Android libraries. So NativeScript not only gives you the entire universe of NPM plugins, but you also get the entire universe of CocoaPod, Objective-C plugins, plus Android plugins. We're talking a ton of stuff, a ton of really neat stuff For instance, if I search here on just audio for CocoaPod, we come up with a long list of native audio Objective-C libraries that we could literally install with one single line and be coding against these APIs right out of the box in JavaScript. This is NativeScript for you. Really, really powerful stuff. Just to show you guys, and I'll get back to the app real quick. This is an app that I recently launched. It is called Shoutout Play. You can install it on iOS. You can install it on Android, but I'm not proud of the Android version. This is not NativeScript's fault. There's a couple particulars with, for instance, the Spotify integration. So this app integrates directly with native Spotify SDKs. One thing that's important about this app, or interesting about this app, is it couldn't have been done on the web. Spotify API only allows 30-second previews of tracks in their web API. The point of this app was to allow people to listen to tracks completely unrestricted from beginning to end and loop through their entire playlist on Spotify. Couldn't do that on the web. So this is an app that's interesting because it can't be replicated on the web. So the iOS version is really quite nice. I actually just released a new version that came out, got approved, I think, today, that allows sharing. So you can actually record a shout out. I'll give you a small demo of it real quick. It does give you a taste of kind of what... This is going to be a funny shout out because this is from Utah.js, where James and I were 2 weeks ago. At least I think it is. What is this?
Driving around from one end. This goes out to all you JavaScript fanatics.
That's applicable.
And especially Mr. Dave Smith.
That's somebody else from Utah.js, but that's a shout out that was recorded over this song, which was just searched through the entire Spotify library, added to a playlist, and then a shout out can be recorded directly on top of that track. The app auto mixes in that shout out recording into the track, and you can share these with people and just give a shout out.
This is how to record a shout out. Really simple.
That uses a native waveform audio buffer display, something that is really makes or shows the native capability pretty well. Really smooth waveform display. It has theme support, which I was going to touch on the end, but we're probably running out of time. But yeah, so that's kind of a taste of the Angular native app. That is one, it took me less than 3 months to write it. I initially focused on iOS. And Android, I didn't even look at really until August, and literally ran it for the first time on Android, and it ran and looked the same. This is because I used NativeScript XML to create it. Now, there were a couple things that I ran into, which is why the Android version is not as good, and will probably crash on you. If you have an Android version and you install it, you might be able to log in. You might be able to play a couple tracks if you search for it, but it'd probably crash on you because I'm dealing with a thing with the dialogue service. It's something specific to Android and Angular. Hopefully I'll have it soon in the next week. But if you have an iPhone, definitely check it out. It's pretty cool. It's a lot of fun to play around with. Anyway, back to our thing at hand. We had Lodash installed. We ran the app, and we have a list, and they're all ordered. And we add an item, and what do we get? They're all ordered in order except for 10 and 11 and 12. We won't go that far. There's a way to do that too. Technically it's ordered, right? Yeah. I mean, technically that's how OS 10 even ordered stuff for. Yeah. So at that, you guys, I don't want to keep you any longer. I can't even believe we fit that in that time crunch. But thank you. Yeah, thanks you guys. Let me just. I don't know, if people need to leave, I understand. If you got a couple quick moments and you really want to see theme stuff, I'll show. I'm not going to live code any of that, but I'll show you some stuff if you want to see it. So it's okay. It's up to you.
Real quick before you get started, where can people find you on the internet, and is there any information that you want to share before, if anybody needs to leave?
Thank you. Yeah, real quick, I'll just go to this right here. You can find me on Twitter at Walker Run. In the NativeScript Slack link right there, a tiny URL, but jump in Slack. I'm definitely better to chat on the NativeScript Slack. A lot of great people in there. Really amazing community. Ask any questions. Somebody will probably help you eventually. The demo Angular app that we just did live, I'm going to have up at this Angular native demo. Just if you wanted to refer back to it, you're like, what the heck do you do there? I'll put that up at Angular native demo. My GitHub handle is just Nathan Walker, it's just my name. And I just have a quick reference point on Angular 2 Seed Advanced. This is something that I started early in the year, maybe I can't remember exactly when, but it has evolved to expand to Electron desktop support. It is a way to build an entire web app and share all the code and use a NativeScript app as well as build it on Electron, all using the same code base. So a lot of interesting stuff going on in there. I make use of custom Angular decorators to actually do live swapping of the template URLs. So when you run it in NativeScript, it will actually use a .tns.html file to actually load a NativeScript view file instead of a web HTML file. And that uses ngrx store out of the box. Again, just a big fan. I plan to integrate ngrx effects in here too, just because they go hand in hand. To me nowadays, if you use ngrx store, you should be using ngrx effects. So I plan to integrate that in here as well.
Is this what you used to call NativeScript Angular Magic?
NativeScript ng2 Magic is a different plugin that I made that actually allows you to drop in or NativeScript into any Angular project. There's a couple different project formats that are supported. Ideally, the target was for Angular CLI folks. So if you set up a project from Angular CLI, you could npm I NativeScript ng2 Magic, and right when that installs, it's going to run through a post-install script. It's going to actually install the NativeScript Angular 2 template, and it's going to automatically create a symlink between the source and Angular CLI and the NativeScript app. So you can immediately start using all your components from a CLI project inside a NativeScript app. All you need to do is just create .tns.html files for NativeScript views. So that's an interesting project in and of itself, totally different. The Advanced Seed project uses kind of a custom Magic setup. So it kind of does what Magic does, but in a more customizable way. So it has all of the custom decorators baked into the seed, where ng2 Magic kind of brings or installs those decorators into a project. So two different things. Okay, so that's me. Real quick, I was just going to show. So in that demo that I just showed, it was of Shout Out Play, my passion project. I just did a talk on this in Boston last week, and they'll publish that video soon, I hope. But I go into more detail on the whole setup of this app, and it was a pretty fun talk. But the themes are really fun because you can use it's called NativeScript theme that my good friend Nathaniel Anderson. Hey, thanks for coming again. Yes. NativeScript themes from Nathaniel Anderson, amazing guy. If you get in the Slack channel, Nathaniel Anderson is incredible. He has helped me through many of difficult issues when I was developing Shout Out Play, helped me with some particular Webpack issues when I was building for the stores. But he wrote this really cool plugin that allows you to do live theme swaps in a NativeScript app, and it literally, you can create different CSS files, and you call this function. Actually, he has an example of it here. You require in the NativeScript themes plugin, and you say apply theme, and you just pass in the name of a totally different CSS file, and you can just live swap themes in your app. Super cool, super simple. So I kind of took that plugin and I just expanded. I use NativeScript Dev Sass plugin to integrate Sass into Shout Out Play, and that allows me to define kind of a base set of variables. These are defined for kind of the base level style, the one that comes out of the box, that purple vibe. And then I have different themes defined here. So I have this green variables, which takes the same variables, defines different colors. I have a gray and an aqua. And those are basically used as the baseline to build these different sets of themes. So I have aqua and Android, and you see these .android, .ios on the styles. NativeScript not only does it use .os and .android on JavaScript files, but it also does it on style files. So Android has very specific styling sometimes. Generally, they're okay, but you have to override a few to get them, to kind of look the same on both platforms. So you can manually override those by creating a .android CSS file. And when NativeScript runs, if it's on Android, it's going to grab the Android file. And that is how it works across the board, even for JavaScript. So if there is only one JavaScript file, it's going to grab that. If there's an iOS and Android with the same name, it's going to grab the iOS file for iOS and likewise for Android. So again, same thing with CSS. So basically what I do is in the main bootstrap file, I basically grab, here's where it all happens. I require in the themes, I get the applied theme, so it saves these actually to a local store. So when you relaunch the app after force quitting, you can actually revive that same theme that the user had chosen. So you can give them that theme that they choose every time they launch the app. And I grab that with get applied theme, and you pass in a default. So the default is style.app.css, and so that's grabbing the default style sheet just in case there wasn't one applied. But if there was one applied, it's going to return the name of that style that the user had chosen. And so I check that here. I basically say if it was already app.css, I'm making sure it's style app.css. This was a migration because in the 1.0 version I released, I actually had all my styles in the root of the project, and I decided to move them all inside of style. So this was making sure that if the app CSS was the applied theme, that it sets it to the right directory. And then same thing, migration with the yellow theme. So you can kind of disregard this. This was just migration stuff for my project. But then I apply that active theme. So that's what turns that active theme on. And then I use kind of an interesting thing here, which is just a static service that I pass in the custom theme that the user chose. The reason I have something like this is because I use a plugin that I made called Fancy Alert, and Fancy Alert should use all the colors that the user had in the theme. So I have, aside from the CSS themes, I have a static file that also defines those same variables. And what this allows this to do is it allows the Fancy Alert service to grab the right color, because that service takes in properties. It's an Objective-C CocoaPod, and it takes in color properties when you construct it. And because those are constructed programmatically and not through CSS, I use this static color service to basically map those to the same colors that the user chose in the theme. So that was kind of an interesting pass to get that wired up. But that, it actually, again, is pretty simple, but it basically maps those CSS properties and allows that to work. And if we just look at theme component, again, you're going to see just what we went over, a lot of NativeScript or Angular native stuff. I'm actually reusing components here. So this is a main action bar. I actually defined action bars as components themselves, and then I have them declared in the module that is bootstrapped at runtime, and that allows me to use those components, of course, throughout those view files. But so you'll see some stuff like that. But right in here, you can see each of these buttons, which, you know what, maybe I have it. Do I have it in my emulator? I do. Let's see if I can just launch it here. I can just show you guys the app. I'm going to log in here. I'm going to log into Spotify. So again, this is all integrated through Spotify's native SDK. This is the NativeScript Spotify plugin. And I'm just going to go right to playlists. This is a bunch of playlist stuff that I got. You can see here that these are actually tracks that have shout outs on them. They show up with like this if they have a shout out on them. Otherwise, they're just standard. But again, new in the version that just came out this morning, or it was late last night, you can now share that. And what you end up getting on the device is you can share it through a text message or an email, and that'll actually send a link that will link you right back, link another user into the app. And when they log in, it actually will pull that shout out down in that track, and it will save it in the shared area over here. So I don't have any shared in the emulator, of course. But so anyway, color themes are here. And so that is exactly the view you're seeing behind. It is a scroll view. Obviously, I can scroll it. There's a stack layout, got some classing on it, and each of these are a grid layout that house the image and the button on the bottom. When I select these, you can see it changes the theme live. And now I go and the whole app has a totally different theme. Really fun stuff to mess with. Gray Fox is pretty nice. And if I play these, oh, this one might be nice actually. See if we get it.
You can code against Objective-C APIs, Java APIs. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god.
And that's NativeScript. Yeah. Angular native, you guys. I love it. It's definitely so much fun.
Question, if you wanted to attach a CSS style to one of the elements, how would you do that in CSS? Since those stack layout, I don't know if that's an actual element. You want to do it other than just a class.
Oh, yeah. So you want to do it inline.
Yeah.
Inline
So
styles.
Like your CSS file, and you have like maybe you have a full page, and then your descending selector is like an element, is like maybe a button or something, right there. Well, what if you wanted to attach it to the grid layout rather than the button?
Well,
Is there an element that would be?
this class is attached. These are all attached to the stack layout, and this is attached to the grid layout. Did you see that?
Yeah, no, I got that part, but like if you're in the CSS file and you want to like style by element rather than by class.
Oh, you can totally style by element. Now we will frown upon that. You can totally style by element. Yes. Sorry, I was not following you there. Yeah, you could totally come in here and you could say, sure. You could say stack layout and make all the backgrounds black.
That's not like
A high level abstracted element? No, it literally will take that definition and it will apply those properties to every single stack layout in your project. Yeah. We frown upon that, but you can certainly do it. Definitely. We actually started the theme project out like that originally, but if you look at Bootstrap, they don't do that. And they do it, I mean, it's primarily because it's hard to override, right? Because if you define a bunch of tag level classes in a CSS framework, and then you go and try to override those, you will run into some weird overriding issues eventually. Yeah. Any element that you have in NativeScript markup, you can tag the element straight up. If I just go back to that, not that, but that. So yeah, grid layout. You could have image. Yeah, you could literally define those elements in your CSS, no problem, and they'd work. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything. There's a lot of. So actually, in Boston, I said I was going to open source this project, and I just realized I haven't yet. So I probably need to flick that switch and make this open source. But I'll do that. And there's a lot of really good stuff inside this project. I contemplate whether I should do that or not because it was some hard work. But there's a lot of goodies in there on how to do all sorts of stuff, even from conditional plugin requiring. Maybe we'll just end on that because that is really easy to do, but I didn't know how to do it initially. But this is an example of how to conditionally require a plugin. So if I go back to slides, and I want to show you guys one particular slide from my talk in Boston. It kind of lays this out really well. Do this, and we'll do this. And it is here. So this, the project uses 16 total community plugins, okay? That's a lot. The goal I was trying to shoot for in doing the app was try to use as many community plugins as possible. I kind of wanted to see what the limit was. Like, would it break down? Would we get rejected from the App Store because some of the plugins do weird things? Who knew? I mean, really, we didn't know because at the time, there wasn't a whole lot, there wasn't really any apps that had a ton of plugins. So I wasn't sure what we'd run into, but luckily it really was fine. But out of 11 of those, I contributed on or authored, and then 3 of them are iOS only. And so Easy Audio, for instance, I'll just use this quick example. Again, this is in the talk that I gave in Boston, but this is a good example of where two different plugins are used on two different platforms. So on the left, that is an Objective-C CocoaPod called Easy Audio. I wrapped it into NativeScript Easy Audio plugin. That is a custom component. It's taking live audio buffer stream and rendering that display. On the right, Easy Audio doesn't exist. So what I ended up doing was actually creating stack layouts. That is, if you look at what that view looks like, well, actually I have it right here. That's iOS. Let's look at Android because it's a little more interesting. That is the Android display. It's literally just a grid layout with 5 stack layouts in it, and they're all height 200. And then what I do is I do some math to take the input meters that come off the recorder. So when you talk into the device, I grab the meters on 100 millisecond intervals because it's not an observable type of thing. Actually, I could probably do an observable off of that, though, now that I think about that. That would be cool. But right now, it actually just sets up an interval, a 100 millisecond interval, and it emits observables for the values that are bound in that view. And I randomize the values just a tad to make it look a little more organic. But that literally is just stack layouts with a little bit of random math. And it's just changing the height. Literally just changing the height.
Based on amplitude or frequency?
That would be amplitude.
Okay.
Yeah, and I basically take the incoming metering from the recorder there, and you can see it right there. I mean, that's literally the code that does it. I floor the value. There's the meters. I divide by 6,000 because I found that was the...
Attempting to run a real-time FFT to do a spectral analysis?
No. 6,000 happened to be the magic number to get the right height there, but I divide that, and then I just randomize a few of these values. And those observables, again on the left, you can see those are bound just like we went through in the example. Those are bound to the height. So again, you can bind to anything in the view, including the height attribute of literally NativeScript XML elements. So I'm actually taking the attribute height, binding those right to observables, and using the async pipe on all 5 of those, and just emitting those random values on that stack as it grabs the meters. And yeah, that ended up working, you know. So, and as far as conditionally requiring, back to that bit, this is how you can do it. You can declare those vars in TypeScript, the vars that you're going to use throughout your code, and then you can just conditionally require the plugin that's only platform specific above Easy Audio is only iOS only. If you ran that code and required NativeScript Easy Audio on Android, it will crash. So you have to do this because that NativeScript Easy Audio plugin is not for Android. So you need to basically save yourself with a conditional like that in order for the app to run on both platforms. So, and then below, instead of using Easy Audio, I use a different community plugin that me and Brad worked on, NativeScript Audio, and that I require in, and then just pull off those classes from that plugin. Lots of stuff there. Anyway.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sorry. So I'm curious about, we're developing right now an application with Angular 2 web app and an iOS native client app, right? And so we're like dealing with the disparity of having to, basically do things in 2 different platforms, right? Is there anybody here who has actually converted from an iOS native app to an Angular native app, or chosen right out of the box to go with an Angular native app over an iOS native app?
I have chosen to go Angular native over, yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, going from Objective-C, we've had that question actually on Slack before, and honestly, it's a pretty straightforward process outside of your views, right? Because you have, those nib files, your views, I don't know of any right now, but there might be one that might like auto-convert those nibs to NativeScript XML. That would be super cool. But that would probably be the bulk of the work, because Objective-C you can just code straight in NativeScript. So all your Objective-C code you can use in NativeScript straight up. You convert it slightly. There's like a process of that. Like, I'll show you a quick example of that, because we didn't touch on that. And then we probably should shut it down. But
It's getting close to that time.
yeah. Just a quick example of how, so this would be interesting to you though, specifically, because if you're talking about taking an already existing Objective-C app, converting it to NativeScript.
Before we introduced Angular, we had the Objective-C, right? And now we have the Angular 2 app, and we want to like say, hey, how can we leverage this technology both, right?
I would highly recommend my advanced seed for that. Honestly, it gives you a lot out of the box with that setup. You could do it yourself, but you're going to end up going down a lot of the same paths. I mean, that was done along the way, even in the early beta releases of Angular, and so a lot was learned along the way. So I mean, there's maybe a couple different ways to do it, but it would get you a lot out of the box.
That's an option. Like from the root here of devs, a lot of smart people here. Anybody object to that? Like saying, like, should we not convert an Angular or an iOS native to Angular native?
Yeah, it's a good question. Good question. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that.
It's kind of a broad one though, right?
It's broad.
But we don't know what your app does.
I think there is a simple answer to that, really, a simple response to that. If you guys have stressed resources that are trying to deal with Objective-C code and you want to bring that all in one, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. There'd be no reason not to. You can bring it all in one code base. Who wouldn't want to do that?
No, exactly right, yeah.
So that's the simple response. If you have millions of dollars and you love having an Objective-C department, then screw NativeScript. You know, that's usually pretty rare. Yeah.
I have a question, like NativeScript versus even, obviously, probably you already answered those questions.
Hey, thanks for coming, man. Thanks for your questions.
Why you choose one versus another?
It's a good question too. Now this comes back to web versus native, and it's kind of the big this discussion. And it's not really, to me, it's not really a debate. One's not really better than the other. It really depends. To me, it depends on what you're after. As a small company, as a startup, if I want to get an app out there, you want to go with the web, because you want to hit mobile app browser, you want to hit the web desktop browser, you want that reach as a startup, right? But then, as it develops, you then want to tailor a really nice experience on mobile. That's where NativeScript comes in, because you can only really do that with a native view. That's the thing that's left out of a lot of these web debates and discussions. Progressive web apps are awesome. I love them, and web can do a lot of amazing things. They can provide push notifications, but what they often leave out is that view layer. The HTML DOM is not, in my opinion, will never be as performant as a native view layer. Yeah.
So, going the other direction, migrating from like well-developed web app to a NativeScript app, would you be able to easily bridge a lot of the resources you already developed in your NativeScript app?
Yes. So you're saying if you already have Objective-C code and Java code?
No, if you already have a good web app, like say with like Angular and .NET or Node or something like that, just a web app. You want to migrate over.
Can you use it in NativeScript? Yes, if you're using Angular. Yes, if you're using Angular 2.
What is that conversion like to go from an Angular 2 web app to an Angular 2 NativeScript app? Right?
So we'll take, I can show you that real quick like. So let's go here, here. And I'll do this real quick, James. So here, make sure I didn't upgrade something here. Oh, shoot. Well, hey, real quick, the Seed Advanced, clone it, check it out. It'll show you that exactly. You can run npm start, this is the web app. You can run npm run start.ios, and it's going to run that same view, but it's going to run in a native view and NativeScript app. It's going to run the same thing in Android, npm run start.android. So you can run web, iOS, Android, both mobile apps, native views, using the same components that the web is using. Yeah. Yeah. All right, maybe another beer and we'll go.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks you guys very much. Thanks everybody for coming.